Hi, and welcome to the Symantec Sales Expert Plus training on the Symantec Data Loss Prevention Customer Demo. My name is Ernie Simmons. I'm a technical education consultant with the DLP group, and I'll be leading you through this training. After completing this course, you should be prepared to apply demo tips and best practices and deliver a customer demo. The course is divided into 3 sections. The first is preparing to deliver the demo. The second is delivering the demo, and finally there'll be a very brief summary at the end. Preparing to deliver the demo. The resources that are available for the demo are the demo VMs and the demo script and accompanying presentation. The VMs, which you'll see later in the training, are basically 3. One's called Enforce, one's called Endpoint 7, and one's called Data Insight. Enforce has a single-tier installation of Enforce, Oracle, and a detection server, which is configured to cover multiple channels. Endpoint 7 represents a typical endpoint for a typical endpoint user. In our case, we call him Joe User, and that's where a lot of the action of the demo takes place. Data Insight, as the name implies, hosts the Data Insight installation. You don't usually spend much time in the Data Insight VM, but because Data Insight is such an important competitive differentiator for the Symantec Data Loss Prevention suite, we always include it in demos, and you will see some of the information pulled from Data Insight in the Discover incidents that appear in the Enforce console. So you'll want to download those 3 demo VMs and make sure you're very familiar with them. For internal folks, you can find the demo VMs on Synapse in the location described. It's now just a little bit before the official GA date for 12.5, but within 2 or 3 weeks we should have those demo VMs updated and posted to Synapse in the location listed. For the demo script and presentation, those are available on SymIQ in the location listed on the slide. Once you get to that page, you go to Demo POC Resources, then click on Demo Collateral, and you'll find those 2 files listed there, the demo script and the accompanying presentation. For partners, due to third-party licensing restrictions, we aren't allowed to distribute the demo VMs to you all. Apologies for that. We'd love to, but that's a prohibition by the legal department, and in respect of licensing, we can't do that. So partners will have to create their own demo VMs. On the other hand, the demo script and the demo presentation are available to qualified partners. Here's some things to keep in mind about delivering the demo. Typically, you're going to deliver the demo after the first meeting. The first meeting is where you're introducing the prospect to the product suite, talking about their needs and their organization, and getting a sense of how you'll be able to impress them in a later demo. If you're new to the demo, go ahead and learn the script first. It's a good way to get started, to understand what's in the demo VMs, and it gives you a golden path, so to speak, that you can follow to give a successful demo. But definitely over time, you're going to want to become more familiar with the demo VMs so that you're able to tailor a demo to your prospect's requirements and interests. And of course, wherever possible, please do mention competitive points, and I make an effort in the upcoming section to point some of those out as we go through. Delivering the demo. In this section, I'll deliver the demo in character, and then I'll conclude the training with a brief summary. Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, for joining me for a demonstration of Symantec Data Loss Prevention. My name is Ernie Simmons. I'm a technical education consultant for the DLP group at Symantec, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to show you the features of this great product suite. You already know something about Symantec Data Loss Prevention, but let me just say a few words to set the stage before we dive into the actual demo. As you know, organizations need to protect confidential information to demonstrate compliance and to safeguard their brand, reputation, and IP. Symantec Data Loss Prevention lets you protect what you define as your confidential information wherever it is stored or used. That means that Symantec Data Loss Prevention can prevent confidential data from leaving your network inappropriately. This is a very well-developed and well-tested product. It's currently in its 12th generation. We have over 2,000 customers, more than half of the Fortune 100, and we have led the Gartner Magic Quadrant for data loss prevention for 8 years in a row. Over the years, we've had a lot of experience with data loss prevention, and we've heard a lot of requirements from our customers in terms of what they want from a data loss prevention solution. Customers tell us that they want a comprehensive solution that can cover them on the network, on the endpoint, and on storage. And they want all of this controlled from a central policy and remediation console that allows for very easy policy authoring and easy incident remediation. On the network side, they've told us that they want a product that can cover email, webmail, traffic over HTTPS and FTP, as well as IM. On the endpoint side, customers have told us that they need comprehensive coverage, including copy to USB, CD, and DVD, as well as coverage for print fax, copying to and from network shares, the ability to scan stored data over up to thousands of endpoints simultaneously, and over the last few years, there's been an increasing interest in protecting information on mobile devices. On the storage side, we hear from customers that they want to be able to scan a wide variety of repositories and to take action when they discover confidential files that are exposed inappropriately. They want to cover file servers, they want to cover other components like Exchange, SharePoint, Lotus Notes, databases, and web servers. And as mentioned, they want to be able to control all of these vectors from one central console where they can write policies once and deploy them across the product suite, and where they can remediate their incidents easily and effectively. Based on these requirements, Symantec has come up with a complete data loss prevention product line. At top right, you can see our network products, which consist of Network Monitor, Network Prevent for email, and Network Prevent for web. We'll see more about these as we go through the demonstration, but at a high level, Network Monitor lets you passively monitor most any type of TCP traffic, while the two Network Prevent products allow you to monitor and block email or monitor and block web, respectively. On the endpoint, we have also a few products available that can help you protect your data. We have Endpoint Prevent, which allows you to monitor copies to the local drive of up to thousands of endpoint computers, while also monitoring and blocking a variety of activities on the endpoint, like copy to USB, for example. Endpoint Discover lets you scan up to thousands of endpoints simultaneously to check for confidential data lying exposed on the endpoints inappropriately. And then finally, for endpoint, we have our mobile product, which has two components. One is Mobile Prevent and one is Mobile Email Monitor. Mobile Prevent blocks the transfer of confidential data from mobile devices, while Mobile Email Monitor monitors the download of confidential data over corporate email to mobile devices. Finally, our storage products consist of Network Discover, which lets you scan a large variety of repository types to search for confidential data that may be inappropriately exposed, for example, in file shares. Network Protect, the companion product to Network Discover, lets you take action when you find those files. For example, it lets you quarantine confidential files to a secure location. Data Insight is a data governance solution for unstructured data, which basically monitors file access over time to help you build a picture of who's been touching that data. Information from Data Insight can be pulled into Network Discover to give you more context around storage incidents. And we'll see an example of that later in the demo. And finally, at the bottom of the slide, you can see the single management platform that serves all of the products in the suite. This platform is called the Enforce platform, and it covers administration of the various products, as well as policy authoring, and it also has excellent reporting for incident remediation. Now, in the demo that I'm about to show you, we'll first look at some network and endpoint incidents. Then we'll take a look at how you can remediate incidents, including our very nice incident snapshots where all of the information about a given incident is collected in one place. We'll then dive a little bit into policies, taking a look at our detection and group rules, as well as our response rules. We'll switch gears at that point and go into storage incidents, showing you how Network Discover can scan a repository and identify and quarantine confidential files. Then we'll transition into reporting and finally, role-based access control before we wrap up the demo today. Please stop me at any time if you have any questions and let me know if the features that I'm showing you have relevance for your organization. I'm going to go ahead and switch over into the demo environment right now. I'll say a couple words about it real quick just to orient you. The demo environment that we're going to be looking at today consists of 3 VMs. This first one, as you can see here, is an enforce VM, we call it, where we're running enforce and a detection server locally in the VM. This is where we'll come in to look at policies, to review incidents, and so forth. This is basically an IT security server. If we go over here to the endpoint VM, this is where we'll be spending a lot of the time during the demo. This machine represents a typical end user's machine. In this case, we call him Joe User. Joe's just a typical employee who's using data throughout the day. He's not a malicious insider. He's a well-meaning insider, as we like to call him. Someone who sometimes just makes mistakes when he's handling confidential data. The third VM is the Data Insight VM. And this one we won't be looking at that much during the demo, really not at all. But this is the VM that's running the Data Insight data governance solution that I talked about earlier and that we'll hear more details about later. Let's go ahead and go to Joe's laptop here. And let's see how Joe makes some mistakes handling confidential data during the day and how Symantec data loss prevention protects your organization. Let's go first to Joe's email. And Joe's going to go ahead and send an email to a guy that he used to work with named Larry, who's now working at another company. And he shares information with Larry from time to time, certainly has over the years. And today he's going to go ahead and just show him an interesting thing from the last company party where they had a bingo game. And some of the folks in the company won some money during that bingo game. We can open the bingo winners file really quickly just to see that indeed this is a harmless file. This doesn't really have any confidential data. And the reason that we want to show you this is to show you that Symantec data loss prevention is content aware. All right? So that means that Symantec data loss prevention determines which information leaving your network is confidential as defined in your policies and only prevents that data from leaving. So when Joe sends this harmless information over to Larry, what would you expect to happen? As we can see, the data went through. It's harmless data. It was analyzed by Symantec data loss prevention in the background and found to be harmless and therefore let through. But let's take a look at what happens when Joe sends another email to Larry. And this one will contain confidential data. In this attachment, Customers for Processing West. When we open this file, we can see that indeed it does have quite a bit of confidential data, starting with social security numbers over here at left. There's also an account ID, a first and last name, as well as another account number, driver's license, and so forth. So this is a very confidential file that your organization would definitely not want to leave the organization. This time again, Joe's going to try to send that to his friend Larry at another company. And in the background, what's happening is the Symantec data loss prevention server is analyzing the contents of that email and the attachment and determining whether or not it matches your policies. This all happens at lightning speed, and if a match is found, then Symantec data loss prevention will stop this email from leaving your organization according to your policies. We can see when we go to Larry's inbox that that second email did not come through. But meanwhile, in Joe's inbox, we see a customized email notification that's been sent by Symantec data loss prevention to tell Joe that his recent email was a violation of company policy and that he can go and find more information about the company's data handling policies at a certain location. Now this is a customizable email. You can put anything in here that you want, and you can see that you can have links as well as variables from the incident, including the name of the email, the name of the policy that was violated, and so on. What we've found over the years is that training customers and educating them, making them aware of when they're handling data inappropriately, really drives down your risk over time. And an email notification like this serves that purpose very well. So let's say Joe is maybe not convinced yet. He still would like to show Larry this information, so he's going to think about a couple other ways that he might be able to do that. One of those would be to copy it over to USB. So he's going to copy this file and attempt to transfer it over to a USB here. When he does that, again, he's blocked. Here we're seeing an endpoint pop-up notification which tells Joe that his action is potentially against company policy, and it also asks him to enter a user justification. Why is he doing this? This pop-up notification, just like the email notification before, is entirely configurable. It also has some nice user justifications out of the box if you want to keep those. In this case, Joe's going to read through these really quickly and opt for "I did not know transferring this data was restricted." He's going to click OK. Joe's a little bit stubborn. He's going to try a couple more things just to make sure he can't do what he wants to do, which is share this data. Next thing he's going to do is he's going to open this file, and he's going to try to print it out. Okay, well that's strange, Joe thinks. Definitely I keep getting these pop-up notifications. It's beginning to sink into Joe that this is data that he shouldn't be handling like this. He's going to go ahead and click OK, close out of here, and just to try one more thing, he thinks, well, maybe if I just encrypt this data using an encryption solution that I have running on my endpoint here, maybe that'll allow me to get it off the laptop and get it out of the organization. So he goes here and he goes to his AxCrypt application and attempts to encrypt that here. But lo and behold, he's been stopped one more time. The Symantec data loss prevention product has again successfully prevented data loss, and in the process has made an attempt at least. I mean, Joe may be a little bit slow on the draw here, but certainly the product is attempting to educate him on the proper use of confidential data. Let me just type in to show you this one feature. The user can, if they don't want to choose any of the existing justifications, they can type in their own justification. All right, so those are a couple of examples of Joe using data inappropriately on his own laptop. Let's go over, switch gears here and see what all this looks like from the remediator's point of view, the point of view of IT security. We're going to go into IT security's mail now. And we're going to see that original email that Joe tried to send has been redirected to a quarantine. So in our demo environment, we just use a quarantine box that's set up in IT security's mailbox. But in real life, this could be a quarantine on an MTA, for example. And we do have a very nice integration I want to point out with Symantec Messaging Gateway, where you can quarantine emails downstream from Symantec Data Loss Prevention. And those emails can be released either from Symantec Data Loss Prevention or from within Symantec Messaging Gateway. That integration is called Email Quarantine Connect, and it's a very nice integration between those two products. But again, in our demo environment, we just have a simple box set up in IT Security's mailbox. Now, the email was quarantined for the time being, and IT Security also received a notification, an automated notification from Symantec Data Loss Prevention. You can see here that the notification gives some details about who the sender was, who the intended recipient was, the subject, and the policy violated. You also get a little bit of information about the incident itself. Notably, it's an incident that has high severity with a match count of 410, which means that according to your policies, 410 violations were found in this one email. So it's a pretty serious incident, and based on that, IT Security is going to want to log in to the console and take a closer look. Here's the incident snapshot in semantic data loss prevention. You can see right away that it's an SMTP incident and that the email was blocked. The status of the incident is new and the severity, as we saw before, is high. You can also quickly see which policy was violated, and if you wanted to, you could click on this link to find more information about that policy specifically. Here you see the sender and the recipient. You could click to open the violating attachment right here, as well as the original message. In the middle, we have the real crux of the matter, which are the actual matches that were found to violate your policies. And you can see these are a series of Social Security numbers highlighted in yellow with a little bit of context provided around. Over here we can see attributes, special custom attributes as we call them for this incident, including more information about the employee, Joe user, his department, his contact information, as well as information about his manager. You could also click over here on this correlations tab to see similar related incidents that share one or more attributes with the current incident. And this is a really nice feature to be able to see patterns in terms of employee behavior and patterns in terms of incidents. Now, after reviewing this incident and seeing how many matches there were and that it was a high severity incident, IT security is going to decide we need to escalate this incident and notify Joe's manager. So IT security clicks here, confirms that they do indeed want to take this action. And then let's go back into the mailbox here. We're going to switch over to Joe's manager's mailbox, Jane Manager, and we'll see what appears in Jane's mailbox. So based on that action that IT security just took inside the Enforce console, Jane is going to receive this email which tells her that her employee Joe has tried to send confidential data in possible violation of the America's PII policy. This is basically for her reference. There's no action needed on her part, but at least now she knows. And again, this is another completely configurable email notification. Let's go back into the console real quickly again, thinking of ourselves as IT security, and take a look at some of those endpoint incidents that we know are in here based on Joe's activities. The first one is this USB incident, or the virtual USB that we saw in the demo environment. You can see from the icons here that is a USB incident and that the attempt to copy was blocked. You can quickly see that it also was made by Acme user Joe. You can click down in here into the incident snapshot to see more details. The incident snapshot is a really nice feature of semantic data loss prevention reporting because it lets you see all the critical information in 5 to 10 seconds and to quickly make a decision about how best to remediate this incident. You can see here that the endpoint incidents look basically the same as the network incidents, and as we'll see later, basically the same as the storage incidents. So once users get used to these incident snapshots, it's very easy to navigate through the console. This is an endpoint removable storage device incident. In this case, it was that virtual USB. We can see that the attempt to copy was blocked. It's another high severity incident that happens to be with that same file as we know. And then you can go down here and see the user who is logged in. You can see that user education justification that was chosen by Joe when the pop-up appeared on his screen, saying that he did not know transferring this data was restricted. This type of information is very useful in reporting because you can do reports to show how many incidents were supposedly triggered by this lack of knowledge about transferring data, for example. That's why we call it user education over here. If you see a lot of incidents that show this lack of education, you might decide that as an organization you want to roll out some new training for employees about how to handle confidential data. Then down below you can see the file and so forth. Again, very similar to the network incident that we saw earlier. Same in terms of custom attributes showing the employee and manager, and of course the critical matches here shown in the middle. Now let me just go and show you really quickly one of the other incidents that Joe created, and this was the one where he tried to use the unauthorized encryption application. Remember that ACScript application that we saw. And just want to point out, this is an endpoint application file access incident, as we call it. The endpoint application file access feature of semantic data loss prevention is really a strong one because Out of the box, of course, it comes with many applications already configured in terms of coverage. But you can also go in and add basically any new application that appears on the market, anything that you think you'd want to cover in terms of preventing that application from handling your confidential data. So it's a very nice feature of Symantec data loss prevention, specifically for the endpoint products, and it's called Endpoint Application File Access Control. This particular incident was caught by that feature, and we can see that the attempt to encrypt the file in this case was blocked. We can see who did it again. We can see again the user entered information. I really want to show this to Larry. And then we can tell the application that was used for this. So again, nice similar look and feel across the incident types, easy remediation, very easy to see all of the data collected in one place in the incident snapshot. Let me go over to the slide deck and say a few words before we continue in the VMs. Just to recap what we've seen so far, we've seen action taken by Symantec Data Loss Prevention's Network DLP products, which are listed here. You can see we have Network Prevent for email, Network Prevent for web, and Network Monitor. What these products allow you to do is to monitor confidential data leaving or attempting to leave your network via SMTP, HTTP, IM, FTP, and basically any TCP-based protocol. And then they also allow you to prevent the transfer of this data via SMTP, HTTP, HTTPS, and FTP. The two prevent products are the ones that actually do the prevention. Network Prevent for email covers SMTP, and Network Prevent for web covers HTTP, HTTPS, and FTP. In this demo environment, we've seen actually Network Prevent for email. And this is a quick description of what that product is doing behind the scenes. The end user, in this case Joe, sent an email which was forwarded to the MTA. The MTA routed the email to the email prevent server that you see there at top in orange, and that server, which is one of our Symantec data loss prevention servers, it can also be virtualized, by the way, but I'll just call it a server here in this demo, analyzed the content against your policies and delivered a verdict to the MTA to actually block that email from leaving the network, in this case from going on to Larry at another company. That's Network Prevent for email, and that was the first thing that we saw in the demo environment. Now moving from the network products over to the endpoint products, you can see that Symantec has a couple of endpoint DLP products here listed, Endpoint Prevent and Endpoint Discover. Endpoint Discover allows you to discover data on up to thousands of endpoints to make sure that confidential data is not sitting inappropriately exposed on your endpoints, while Endpoint Prevent lets you monitor and block copy to USB, CD, and DVD, various transfers via network, including email by supported clients, web by supported browsers, FTP and IM. It allows you to monitor and block print fax, copy-paste, copies to and from network shares, and as I mentioned previously, the handling of confidential data by specified applications, of which a great number are already configured out of the box, and to which you can add any number of new applications as they appear on the market. The specific example that we saw in the demo was actually powered by Endpoint Prevent. So you can see here a quick description of how Endpoint Prevent works. The agent inspects data to all these various vectors, all these endpoint user activities, in other words. Any blocking, on-screen notification, or flex response rules are initiated locally, and what we saw was the on-screen notification, that on-screen pop-up that the endpoint agent is delivering. Flex response is an API that allows you to create responses tailored to your organization. Then once the incident is detected, the agent sends incident data to the endpoint server, where it shows up in the Enforce platform for remediation. Very important to note that the agent functions and stores incidents when disconnected from your network. On reconnection, it sends incidents to the endpoint server and then up to Enforce. So you are protected whether those agents are on or off your network. We didn't really see Endpoint Discover in this demo, but Endpoint Discover and Endpoint Prevent share the same architecture, the main part of which is a very compact, stable agent that runs on your endpoints. There's a very nice architecture for our endpoint products, and each endpoint server can accommodate up to 30,000 agents. So it's in communication with up to 30,000 agents. Very scalable. We have some customers now who have well over 100,000 agents in production. Let's talk about policies before I dive back into the demo environment. I mentioned the Enforce platform. This is the central platform for product administration, policy authoring, and incident remediation. We've seen that a little bit already in the demo. But I just want to take a closer look at the policy options within the Enforce platform. Symantec Data Loss Prevention has very flexible policy authoring that your organization will benefit from. Now, policies can consist of a detection component and a response component. As long as you have a detection rule in place, you have a completely functioning policy. The responses are optional. Most customers do use responses, but I just want to point that out, that as soon as you have a detection rule in place, you have a completely functioning policy. What types of detection methods do we provide? You can see them listed there at left. First, there's what we call described content matching, which is basically matching described data, whether described by keywords, by regular expressions, by file type, or what we call data identifiers, which are patterns with validators that are very accurate for identifying ID numbers, for example. All kinds of ID numbers for any number of countries, and I can show you a list a little bit later in the demo. In addition to described content matching, we have a couple of options for fingerprinted data. One is for structured data, things like database extracts, which we call exact data matching, or EDM. And I don't want to confuse you too much with acronyms, but just think of two fingerprinted data options: structured data, EDM, exact data matching, or unstructured data, IDM, or indexed document matching. IDM lets you fingerprint up to hundreds of thousands of documents, specific documents that you want to protect. So those are the two fingerprinting options. In addition, we have vector machine learning, which is a relatively new technology that lets you train the product to recognize documents of certain types with small training sets. So you don't have to fingerprint every document of the type that you want to protect. You just have to provide some examples, and Symantec Data Loss Prevention learns, so to speak, to recognize those document types on the fly. The fingerprinting and vector machine learning are both very scalable. For the fingerprinting, for example, EDM can accommodate up to 2.1 billion cells, and as I mentioned, IDM can accommodate up to several 100,000 documents. So we have very scalable detection methods here. There are a couple more that I can point out very quickly. The group-based rules, for example, you can set up a pull from AD that allows you to define groups that you can then add to policies either as targets or exceptions. An exception, for example, might be you want to let the finance department or people within the finance department handle certain types of financial data that you wouldn't want to let people in other departments handle. And then we have a custom file type analyzer that expands our detection functionality to cover most any exotic file type that may not be covered out of the box, although there are hundreds that are covered out of the box. So that's just an additional detection method. And then you have a lot of options in terms of the Boolean logic that you can use in the policies, in terms of having multiple rules bound together by Boolean ands and so forth. So that's all on the detection side. On the response side, we offer a large variety of response rules, and you've seen some of those already in this demo. We saw the notification by email and by on-screen pop-up. Later on, we're going to see a marker file, which is the file that's left in place of a quarantined file to orient the user to what happened to the original file. In addition to notification, we have blocking. You also saw some of that. Specifically, you saw the SMTP message being blocked. We can also block HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, IM, and all of those vectors that I discussed already from the endpoint perspective, including copy to USB, print fax, copy paste, and so on. In a little bit here, we're going to see the options for copying the file or quarantining the file. Those are both available for Network Discover, and Quarantine itself is available for Endpoint Discover. Modification is an interesting response rule in terms of what it allows you to do in your email infrastructure. You may, for example, want to add an SMTP header that tells the MTA to direct the email to some further downstream processing. And the very classic example is to enforce encryption. So the email prevent server adds an SMTP header that you specify. The MTA then redirects that email to the encryption gateway, and the email gets encrypted in that way before it leaves the network. In addition to all these response rules, we also have a flex response API for storage and endpoint incidents that lets you configure custom responses, such as applying digital rights, encrypting files in place, and so on. Finally, we have 60 or more templates that make it really easy to bootstrap your policy authoring. All of those templates you can also customize however you want, and you can certainly build your own policies as needed. Let's take a look at these policies and policy options within the UI. I'm going to go back into the demo environment. And this time, instead of going to Joe's laptop, I'm going to go back into the Enforce VM, and I'm going to go take a look at the policy that actually caught those incidents that we saw earlier. It's the Americas PII policy. Let's just click in there real quick. You can see that the policy has options for detection, groups, and response, which I talked about earlier on that slide just now. And you can see here that in terms of detection, what we have are several data identifiers. Remember, those were the patterns with validators. And in particular, for the incidents that we've seen so far, they've been caught by this U.S. Social Security numbers data identifiers. So let's click in there real quick just to have a glimpse of what's going on. First of all, you can see that you can set multiple severities for a detection rule. So for example, when you have 30 or more matches, that is considered a high severity incident. Between 10 and 29, you have a medium severity incident. Anything below that would be considered a low severity incident. This ability to set severities really helps you target your remediation efforts. We saw that IT security was very interested in remediating a high severity incident right away, and that's typical. And it makes perfect sense. You want to remediate high severity incidents first. You have the ability to identify which incidents are high severity by setting that up in the detection rule, as you see here. Then for data identifiers, you can see that there are various breadths, we call them, for the data identifiers: wide, medium, and narrow. And the key here is that as you become more narrow in the breadth, you're basically adding more validators. So this gives you some flexibility. If you start off at wide, you're casting a very wide net. You may find that you're seeing a few false positives, in which case you can quickly bring it down to medium or narrow breadth there. But you have a lot of flexibility in terms of the policy authoring here. So let's cancel out of here, out of this data identifier, and I'll quickly show you some of the other detection methods that we just discussed, how you would configure those. You can see that you have the ability to create a regular expression. This is the EVM, the fingerprint for structured data. This is keyword, pretty straightforward. This is the fingerprint for documents, the IDM. This is the data identifier list, which is, as you can see, quite long. There are a lot of data identifiers for North American personal identity, financial ID numbers, healthcare, European personal identity, Asian personal identity, and so on. So the data identifiers are a very powerful feature of the product. And then vector machine learning would be configured here. Again, that was the detection method where you can basically train the product to recognize documents of a certain type by providing a set of sample documents. You then also have more detection methods here under file properties, basically describing the file, and you have some protocol-related options down there. Those are the detection rules. Groups are basically also detection rules, and you can add group rules for targeting certain groups within your organization or excluding certain groups. I mentioned, for example, you could set up an AD pool that creates a group for finance department within your organization, and you may want to create an exception for that group in policies that deal with financial information, because of course you'll be expecting those people to handle financial information. And finally, over here, we'll take a quick look at the response rules that are set up in the policy. And we have quite a few set up in our demo environment, but this is not atypical because, as you know, our policies are write once, deploy anywhere, and they cover all of the DLP products that your organization would have. You can see up here at top there are some response rules for endpoint. The block and show pop-up is one of the ones that we saw in action earlier. This one here for network, block SMTP email, was the original response rule that we saw in action. Remember when Joe sent that email and it was blocked, and then he received an email notification as well as IT security receiving an email notification. Before we move on, and I'll just point out, we will see the quarantine file response rule later on too. So just wanted to point that out. Before we move on though, this remove web content is a really nice response rule from Symantec Data Loss Prevention that lets you remove web content when a user is posting content to a Web 2.0 site. It does it very gracefully. It removes the offending content but allows the transaction to go through so as to improve user experience and to avoid help desk calls. So that remove web content is a really nice feature. We're not showing it in this demo, but something good to know about and a nice competitive differentiator. I'm going to cancel out of here. And before we leave the policy part of the demo, I just want to show you our policy templates because we do have quite a few available right out of the box that help you bootstrap your policy authoring. At the top you can see U.S. regulatory enforcement policies, then later UK and international regulatory enforcement, customer and employee data protection, confidential or classified data protection, and so on. Let's just take a quick look at one of the templates that might be of interest to you. It's this HIPAA and high-tech policy. You could add a fingerprint to this, but I just want to show you the policy rules that are already authored for you. These are a series of composite rules combined by a Boolean AND. We have one that shows data identifier for social security numbers matched with drug keywords. Then we have another combination with social security number as well as treatment keywords, and so on. Let's dive real quick into just one of these keyword lists because I want to show you how much work the Symantec Data Loss Prevention team has already done for the customers who will be using the product. Let's click into the keywords rule here. And you can see that it's a very long list of disease keywords that have already been captured in this particular rule. And these policies get updated as needed over time. This policy was actually recently updated. But you can see that's a lot of work done up front in these templates that is meant to be helpful to our customers. I'll cancel out of here. And then we'll switch gears and go into a storage demo real quick. As you can see in this slide, we have 3 storage products. Network Discover, which lets you scan a wide variety of repositories to search for confidential data, as well as the companion product, Network Protect, which lets you take action on those confidential files once discovered. For example, it lets you quarantine those files. And then thirdly, we have Data Insight, which is a data governance solution for unstructured data. Data Insight can monitor access to files over time and deliver that information about file access to Network Discover, which then uses it as context for your incidents. Basically, that context about who has been using the file and who the effective data owner of the file is, i.e. the person who's been using it the most, is very useful for remediating Network Discover incidents. I'll show you this in just a moment in the demo environment. Let's go ahead and move into the demo environment right now. We'll go down to Discover Targets. This is where you control the Discover scans that you can perform with Network Discover. And you can see that we have a wide variety of target types that you can cover, starting with file systems, Lotus Notes, databases, SharePoint, Exchange, web services. This is an API that lets you import and basically scan any type of repository. And then we have some so-called scanners, which are basically agents that are required for a few of the target types, including Documentum and LiveLink. But we have a very wide variety of targets that you can scan. In our demo environment, we're going to look at a scan of a file share that's sitting here locally on the Enforce VM. Let me just expand this real quick. Let's dive in and take a look at the configuration for this file share scan. Here's where you would select the policy groups that are going to apply to the scan, and you can see that you have an option to do a full scan or an incremental scan. This is a very nice feature because typically what customers will do is start out with a full scan and then subsequently you can run incremental scans, which is a great time saver. In our demo environment, we have the full scan configured to always run just so that we capture all the incidents that we want to show you in the demo. Down below, you have some options for scan scheduling and also scan pausing at specific times. So you might decide you want to pause scans during working hours. The Discover product doesn't really put too much of a load on your repositories where you're storing the content. It's basically like an admin user going through, opening and reading through the files. So it's not that it puts a huge load on those filers, but it's just that, you know, if you're a large organization, you may want to pause those scans at certain times just to prevent any type of minor performance impact. Here's where you would define your user credentials. So these are the credentials under which Discover is going to perform the scan. Here's where you would add the so-called content routes. These are the shares and servers that Discover will be scanning. You can do that either by direct entry, as we have here in our demo environment, or you can do what we call a content route enumeration scan prior to the scan, and that basically goes out, scans your network for shares and servers that you would want to scan. As mentioned, we've just added a single file share here by direct entry for this particular target. You have various filters, include and exclude filters, file size filters, file date filters. Over here, you have some throttling options. And at the bottom, I just wanted to point out this really nice feature, remediation detection preferences. This is a feature known as automated remediation tracking for Discover. And basically, when you check these items, subsequent incremental scans after an initial full scan can automatically remediate incidents for you by determining if the original item has been modified, if the policy has been modified, or if perhaps the item no longer exists. For example, it's been moved from that location and is no longer exposed inappropriately. So that's just one example of the automated remediation that we have. It's a very nice feature for Network Discover. Finally, for this target, we can look under the Protect tab and see that we've enabled options for copying and quarantining. And we'll see an example of quarantine in a moment here. We've also specified where we want the quarantine to reside and the credentials that will be used to write to that, as well as the credentials that will be used to write the marker file. Remember, the marker file or the ransom note is the replacement file that goes in place of the original file that is completely configurable within your policies and which basically gives your users information about what happened to the quarantined file. I'm going to cancel out of here. And then I'm going to show you one file in one of the directories that we're going to scan. This is our familiar Customers for Processing West file, which you can see exists here in the File Share Finance subdirectory. That's one of the subdirectories that's going to be scanned by the target. Let's go in, and we're going to start the scan. While that's running, I'm going to quickly go back into the slide deck just to give you some orientation. This slide depicts what's going on right now in the background. Our Discover server, which powers both Network Discover and Network Protect, depending on how you're licensed, is going in and scanning all the files in that target repository, which in our case is a file share on the local Enforce VM. And then for any confidential files that it discovers, the way that we have our policies configured in the demo environment causes Network Protect to then quarantine those files to the specified quarantine location, which we just saw in the target configuration. Now in the background, you remember there's that third VM in our demo environment, and that's hosting Data Insight, which you can see added to the diagram there on the slide. Data Insight, again, is the data governance solution for unstructured data, which, among other things, is recording a history of file access. So all the users who go into that file share and touch those files, whether they're adding things, saving them, just opening them and reading them, and so on, all of that activity is captured by Data Insight so that we can know who the users of the file are and who the effective data owner is. That's the person who actually owns the file in the sense that they use it the most. Data Insight has all that information collected over time, and when Network Discover finds an incident out on the repository, it sends that incident up to Enforce, and Enforce does a quick pull against Data Insight to pull all of that contextual information into the incident snapshot. So when you as the incident remediator go into the snapshot, you'll see all that history, that access information right there in the snapshot, including who the effective data owner is, and that's going to help you remediate the incident very quickly and effectively. We'll go back in and take a look at the scan. So the scan is completed. I'm going to click on just one of the ways that you can get to the incidents. This is the quickest way from this screen, because I want to show you the incidents that were captured. So these were the 8 incidents that were captured in this particular scan that we just ran. As you can see, 7 of the files were quarantined, as indicated by this bank vault icon here. One of the quarantine files was that customers for processing West file that we're so familiar with. Let's take a look at the incident snapshot for that file. Right away you see it's a file system incident. It has been quarantined, meaning the file has been quarantined. Again, as always, it's a high severity incident based on the fact that it's the same file that we know with the 410 matches, and based on how we have our policies configured in the demo environment. Down here you can see that this file has been seen before in a previous scan, so that may indicate to the incident remediator that this incident should be prioritized for quick remediation because the file's been around for a little while. Now down here you can see the person who the file metadata indicates is the file owner. That's Julio in the Acme domain. And again, I just want to point out that's what's in the file metadata, so that is what is captured by Network Discover. Now below that you can see that the data owner is indicated as Joe User. Our familiar Joe User from so much of this demo is the person who's considered to be the data owner of this file. What does that mean? That means that Data Insight has determined that Joe is the person who touches this file the most and is therefore considered the effective data owner. That's the person that the remediator should go to remediate the file. Now you could do that via an email notification. You could do that via setting up a report in Semantic Data Loss Prevention that Joe or his manager could log into and remediate those incidents. But you know who's actually using the file the most, who's going to be affected if the file is moved, and you know that you'll need to remediate the file with that person. Data Insight, as you can see here, has also shown us the second and third most active users and a little bit of additional information about the access history of the file. Then based on the fact that Data Insight has delivered the information that Joe is the data user, or the data owner I should say, we've then done that AD directory lookup to find more information about Joe and his manager. Since the file was quarantined, let's take a look and see what's sitting in its place. We'll go back to the finance directory, open the file, and in fact we can see that this has now been replaced with what we call a marker file or a ransom note. This is another form of notification. We've seen the email notification, the endpoint pop-up, and now we're seeing this marker file, which is produced by the Network Protect product, and is completely configurable. And again, this is to orient the end user to what has happened to the file and to let them know how to get more information about the file if they have a legitimate reason to use it. That concludes the storage section of the demo. Let me close out of a couple of these things, and then I'll go back over to the slide deck real quick. So the last part of the demo, I'm going to show you some reporting and role-based access control features. Again, I'll be going back into the Enforce console, which is where you do your reporting and your remediation. and I'll show you some of the really nice reporting features of Symantec data loss prevention. Let me get back into the VMs real quick. When I click on the Home button, you can see an example of what we call a dashboard report. This is a report that consists of up to 6 portlets, as you can see here, one for network policy summary, one for network protocol summary, a couple of endpoint reports, and a couple of discover reports. This is a high-level report that could be interesting to an executive, for example, someone who wants to see multiple reports across multiple products under one pane of glass. And of course, these are customizable. You could click this button to customize this particular dashboard, and you could also create any number of other dashboards for use by this and by other users. Out of the box, Symantec Data Loss Prevention provides a large number of reports at your fingertips. You can see in this screen that's about to come up, we have a few saved reports in this demo environment, but we also have all of these network, endpoint, discover, mobile, and user reports that are available right out of the box. It's a wide variety of reports, very useful for remediators, and helps you get started right away with the product. Let's go back to that dashboard because I want to show you how easy it is to dive from these very high-level reports down to the specific details of the individual incidents in the incident snapshots that you're now familiar with from the rest of the demo. Let's go down from this high-level dashboard to an incident type summary. This gives you a chance to see another type of report that's available through Symantec Data Loss Prevention, which is the summary report. And here you can see these endpoint incidents summarized by vector: application file access, clipboard, which is copy-paste, copy to network share. Here's the removable storage device category, which would include the copy to USB, and so on. You can quickly click down from there into, for example, the copy to network share, and next thing you know, you're looking at a list of incidents for that vector. You can quickly go from there and pinpoint a specific incident of interest to you and see the details in the incident snapshot right here. So the navigation is very easy. It's very easy to go from a high level to a low level in no time at all. Another feature that I'd like to point out is our filtering and summarization. Let me get into a little more detail there as I go into some network reports. So here you can see incidents all. This shows all of the incidents for network that are captured in the system. Currently we have 65. It's a demo environment, so there are not that many, but enough to give you the idea of the types of filtering that you can do. So at the top you can see you have a couple of standard filters for status. This is incident status. For incident dates, including the ability to specify a custom date range. You then have the ability also to specify which severities you want to see included in this report. So we could remove a couple of these if we wanted to. I'm going to leave them, but you have that flexibility. If you expand the advanced filters and summarization panel here, you can see that you can add any number of additional filters. So it's very easy to go ahead and do that. Let me just show you real quick an example. We're going to go and take manager name, and we're going to use our famous Jane manager, and then we're going to summarize the report by policy. One click over here, and we have a brand new report showing incidents by people who basically answer up to Jane manager according to policy. There's the familiar America's PII, and here are a couple of other policies: credit card data, design documents, and source code. If this was something that Jane wanted to see on a regular basis, she could go in here and click Save As, quickly name the report, and save it. And you see that it now appears over here under your saved reports. She could also set up a schedule to distribute this report to herself or to any other interested people. Probably it would only be to herself. So that she would receive that report on a regular basis, could log in and see what's going on in the system in terms of incidents that would be of interest to her. Let me show you another type of incident report that is very interesting. This is the user risk summary. This is a relatively new feature in Symantec Data Loss Prevention, but it allows you to find another way of looking at the incidents in terms of finding the best way to prioritize your remediation efforts. In this report, you see incidents by user, starting with the user who has the most incidents. And this report's including network and endpoint incidents. And here we can see Joe user, not surprisingly, is leading the pack with 182 incidents. You could go in here, click on Joe's name, and start to review those incidents that way. This is just one other way that Symantec Data Loss Prevention provides for you to prioritize your remediation. In this case, it's by the users who seem to be having the most incidents. Before we wrap up with reporting, I'll just make a couple of more observations. Symantec Data Loss Prevention reporting, as you've seen, is very robust. It's very easy to navigate. You can find all the details in a very easy to digest format, and so on. So just what you have with Symantec Data Loss Prevention are very robust reporting options. You do, however, also have the ability to use the Incident Reporting and Update API, which lets you securely export incident metadata to third-party reporting apps in case that's of interest. And it also lets those applications securely update incidents in the Enforce console, if that's something that you want to do. In addition to this API, we also have a module called DLP IT Analytics, which is a business intelligence application that expands on the robust reporting available in Symantec DLP. Examples of things that DLP IT Analytics could help you with: it would allow you to see, for example, reports on policy update history, on DLP administrator and user activity, on cumulative discover scan statistics, and so forth. So you could get a lot of really nice analytics reports from DLP IT Analytics. That again is a free component that's available to DLP customers. Before I wrap up the demo, let me show you a couple of things about role-based access control. Here's where you would add a role to the system. Now, throughout this demo, we've been in a master administrator role, so we've had access to everything in the system. But as you know, in real life and in your organization, it's going to be very important to protect the privacy of your employees and to protect that confidential data that is stored in this system from too many eyes. And one way that you can accomplish that is through role-based access control. Here's the configuration page for roles. You can see that you have control over specific privileges, user administration, server administration, and so on. You can control the types of incidents at a high level that users in this role will see: network incidents, discover incidents, and so forth. You can also control the actions that users in this role will be able to take on such incidents. Can they, for example, use response rules? Can they add comments? And so on and so forth. You can also define which smart response rules. Remember, the smart response rules were some of the ones that we saw in the incident snapshots themselves. For example, the escalate and notify manager response rule that appeared in the UI. You can determine whether users in this role will have access to that rule or any other smart responses. You then have controls over other incident actions like deletion of incidents and so on. Really importantly, for employee privacy, you have the ability to control which attributes show up in the incidents that users in this role see. You may decide, for example, you want to not allow them to see matches or history or body or attachments or sender, maybe not even the original message, or perhaps for endpoint incidents not to see the username, or for discover incidents not to see the file owner. Again, you may be creating a role here for a low-level first responder who you do not want to see this level of confidential data. You could also control their ability to view all of the custom attributes. If we go over to the incident access panel, you can see that you can add multiple cumulative conditions for incidents that users in this role would see. For example, you may decide that you only want users in this role to see incidents that are created by a certain policy group, or you may want them to see only incidents that emanate from a certain department, and so on. And again, these incident conditions are cumulative. Under policy management, you can see that you have the ability to let them author policies, control discover scans, manage credentials, and even author response rules. And in the case of policy authoring privileges, which policy groups do they have those privileges for? Finally, under users, you can see any users that have the current role. Let me cancel out of here and show you real quick the effect of this role-based access control within your system. As mentioned, again, we've been logged in as the master administrator throughout this demo, but let's log out now and see what a first responder might see in terms of incidents within the system. Logged in as Bob, you can see that we have access to fewer parts of the UI. Right away you notice that. We can only go to the home page as defined for Bob and then incidents. You can also see that we're not authorized as Bob to see a lot of detail about these incidents. Let's just go in and make that point more clearly. If we go into the endpoint incidents, let's say, here's that application file access control incident that we saw Joe create toward the beginning of the demo. When we click in there, logged in as Bob, you see much less information than you did as the master administrator. So you don't even know really who was actually the user, but you do have the ability to, for example, escalate to someone higher up who would have the privileges to see that information. Again, role-based access control is a great way to protect employee privacy within the system and is a really important part of any comprehensive semantic data loss prevention implementation. That concludes what I wanted to show you in the demo environment. Let me just wrap up with a couple of slides and then I'll take any questions that you have. We like to say at Symantec that 90% of DLP is incident response. Once that incident is captured, how are you going to remediate it? How are you going to make sure that you have the right automation? And you saw some of the automated functionality of semantic data loss prevention in terms of notification and blocking and so forth. How are you going to make sure that you route the incidents to the right responder? And we saw some examples of that with the ability to escalate incident to managers, for example. How are you going to prioritize your incident remediation? Make sure that you see the high severity incidents first. Make sure that you deal with, for example, incidents from high severity users first. How do you get the right information? The 5-second test here refers to the ability to look at an incident snapshot, see all of the relevant information in one place, and to quickly make a decision about how to remediate it. Being able to take the right action, the one-click response. Again, this is, for example, the smart response that you saw where IT security in one click escalated the incident and notified the manager to begin the remediation process. So it really is true that 90% of DLP is incident response, incident remediation, and the excellent reporting and remediation features in semantic data loss prevention make it possible to remediate very effectively and to drive down risk in your organization. This slide gives you a picture of what an implementation would look like at a high level. Most implementations start with a visibility phase where the organization would be tracking incidents, seeing what their risk is right at the first point of deployment. Then it would go into a remediation phase that might last a month or two where you're visiting and repairing broken business processes that may be leading to risk. You're training your employees to understand how better to use data so that they're not taking risky actions with that data, and so on. Then, as you saw in the demo, there are a lot of ways to notify your employees about how their handling of confidential data may be inappropriate. And what we've seen at major customers in the past is that when customers start that notification phase, whether it's email notifications, the pop-ups from the endpoint product, employee behavior really changes. And when employee behavior changes, your risk drops, as is indicated in this slide. Finally, after all of that, you may want to also start to prevent the transfer of confidential information, as we saw in the demo. That's where you've reached a level where you're confident in your policies, your people have been trained, notification has been going on for a while, and behavior has been changing. And so now it's really just a few cases where data may be leaving your organization inappropriately, and you think it's a good time to actually just block that for the protection of your organization and to really just drive down that risk to the lowest level possible. I hope that was a helpful demo, and I really appreciate your time. Let me know if you have any questions about what you've seen today. And in the meantime, let's start thinking about what the best evaluation path for your organization might be. As you know, we have a couple of POC options, a risk assessment where we can come in with production servers and basically look at your production traffic to assess how much risk you have. We also have a technical evaluation, which is closer to being like a feature-by-feature run-through of the product. We're also happy to get you customer references. We have a lot of those and could be very helpful there. Let's also consider next steps and timeline for any of these evaluation paths. Thank you very much for your attention, and let me know if you have any questions. So that's a wrap for the customer demo for Symantec version 12.5. I've already covered where some of the resources are available for you, but I wanted to show that to you one more time. And then in summary, I just wanted to say that definitely practice the demo, go through the demo script until you feel very comfortable with it, and make it your own. It needs to feel natural, and it also needs to be tailored, of course, to your prospects' particular interests and needs. And do remember to include competitive differentiators throughout the customer demo. Thanks very much for listening to this training.